be appreciated. You've heard earlier today that the New Zealand border is closed. Now that's to most travellers, with the exception of a New Zealand citizen or resident, but there are also some exceptions to the border restriction. Those who have a critical purpose to be in New Zealand, and there is a process that one goes through in order to have that assessed. That is on the website, so you can find out more about that. International students do not meet that exception criteria at this point. That is mainly set up for critical workers in the health area, for example, or other key infrastructure projects approved by government. So we have come out recently in terms of the New Zealand government and confirmed that we're not expecting any students, additional students to travel to New Zealand this year for the remainder of 2020. And we do hope that that provides at least some clarity for what's going to be happening in the next few months. And while there is no time frame at this stage for when the New Zealand border will open, it is likely that we're going to open it in phases, possibly with some additional categories added to the exception process. Now, while no decisions have been made around when international students are able to travel back, all agencies are working together to make sure that they can come back as soon as it is safe to do so. And you've heard from Dan and Genevieve earlier about the work that we're doing with other agencies collectively as the New Zealand government, with our New Zealand partners in the sector, to make sure we can get these students back as soon as possible. In terms of where we're at in the immigration system with our processing officers, we have two main locations overseas that process student visas, Beijing and Mumbai. Now, all of those offices, plus our other posts around the world, are closed at the moment. Also, our visa application centres, which is often where documents are sent when we don't have an office in that country, they are also closed. We don't have a time frame for when those offices will open yet, but we are doing everything that we can to make sure that we can open them as soon as possible. To add to that, we are not at this point processing any visas for someone who is outside of New Zealand, unless they have been given the approval to travel as an exception. So this does include students as well as visitors and work visas. There is a section in the Immigration Act that actually prevents us from processing the applications where we know someone won't be permitted entry to New Zealand. And that's to keep the system fair for the applicant. Now, because the border is closed, there is no way that the students will be granted entry to New Zealand. So we legally cannot progress their application. You can see on the screen in front of you that we do have a large number of applications that have been in the system. Now, some of these have been lodged before the New Zealand border closed, but they were processed and the students were unable to travel to New Zealand at that time. If we can move on to the next slide, there are a couple of options as to what these students can do in the meantime. Now, they can choose to withdraw their applications from the system, and they can then request a fee refund if they wish. Those are all individually assessed, and they depend on at what stage the application is at. Or the students can choose to leave their applications in the system, and when we come to processing them later on, when there is clarity around the border and the opening, we would go out to those students and ask for updated documents. So it's really a choice that comes down to you as education agents, the students and their families as to what they would like to do with their applications if they are in the system already. From 10 August, the New Zealand government has made a decision to actually turn off the ability for a student to apply for a visa if they are outside of New Zealand. And this course of action has been chosen because it's in the best interests of the student not to take their application fee and make them provide documents such as chest x-rays when we know that we will not be processing that application for the next little while. So from 10 August, you'll find that students will not be able to proceed past the ability to apply online. If students wish to begin their educational journey and start learning from outside of New Zealand, that is fine from an immigration perspective. They do not need a student visa in order to do that. So that's a really key point, that if you do have students who want to start doing some of their papers online or start learning some of that theory, that they can do that. And that's something that you need to discuss with the education provider. Unlike some of the other countries such as Canada, the New Zealand government has made a decision that the online study that is done offshore will not count towards post-study eligibility. Now, for someone in the tertiary space to obtain a post-study work visa after they graduate, there has to have been a minimum amount of time spent in New Zealand undertaking that study. When you're looking at degree level, so such as a bachelor degree or higher, it's actually less than a year that is required to be in New Zealand to complete that study. It's 30 weeks at the moment. So comparatively, we actually do not have a long duration requirement in our policies, unlike some of the other countries. So we are hoping that there's more clarity for next year with the border, and that some students will be able to travel to New Zealand to complete their study here. Moving on to processing in New Zealand, our offices are open. As you'll be aware, with keeping a close eye on New Zealand, we have done extremely well in our COVID response. And for us, wandering around here, it is sort of back to normal. In the immigration space, all of our offices are open and are processing applications. Our office in Palmerston North, which is right in the middle of the North Island, they are our student branch in New Zealand, and they are processing all of our visas from students who are in New Zealand. There are around 3,000 applications currently in the system at the moment for people who are in New Zealand applying to study, and the team are moving through those. It is our mid-year peak, and these are the type of numbers that we expect. We are seeing that COVID has had an impact in terms of people who perhaps were here as a visitor in New Zealand or as a work visa holder. They may have been here on an essential skills work visa, for example. Now those people have either potentially lost their jobs, or they're unable to depart New Zealand because of flights and what have you, and they're deciding that they want to try their hand at some study while they're here, which is absolutely fine, and they are able to do that and apply for those student visas. Some of those applications are taking a little bit longer for our team to work through, and often that's because it's the first time we've seen these people as a student, and we'd like to make sure that they have got complete applications and are genuine in their intentions. New Zealand, as you'll know, if you've worked with us before, we do have quite a thorough funds assessment process. So at the moment, it's 15,000 New Zealand dollars required for a year worth of study, and that's in order for a student to maintain themselves. Now, we do look closely at that, and we are continuing to look closely at that. We do not want students to end up in a position where they're financially vulnerable, especially